Little trigger warning here to let you know that I'll be talking about my experience of an 8-week miscarriage and following that also a chemical pregnancy in this video. I'm doing it because I watched so many of these while I was going through mine and it gave me so much comfort, so I hope this does the same for you. I've tried to be upbeat and focus on what you may expect, but no, there is still tears and frustration behind the camera. I'm hoping that there aren't too many wobbles of the tripod, but I have little Otto sleeping at my feet and he's right by the tripod, so fingers crossed you don't wobble too much. But I'm sat down because I really wanted to finally have a bit of a catch up and tell our, well, I guess it will be trying to conceive and miscarriage journey. It's been something that I've wanted to talk about. To be honest, I haven't really been putting it off, but I'm happy now. 6-7 months on, life to a certain extent has moved on, and it's not something that I am dwelling on, but I will talk about that because if you were just in the midst of it, that is not how I felt 6 months ago. I'm gonna go way back. So my husband and I have been together 9 years now. We met at university, we met quite young. I was 21 turning 22 when we met, and at that point I already knew that I wanted a family. I think Ollie already knew that he wanted a family, but we discussed probably a few years into our relationship about having kids. At one point we didn't want kids too young. There was lots that we wanted to do and achieve. We wanted to move to London, get our careers going, buy a house. And that has been a huge project for us recently, but we got married last year, so July 2022, and that's when we thought, okay, this is probably around the time that we want to start trying to grow our family. And I'll be honest, I probably wasn't the most relaxed person about it because I'm like an A-type person. I'm very organised, I want everything planned. I really want to, I'm very much an achiever. I want goals ticked off and done. And so with trying for a baby, for me, it was very much like, well, we're going to do this right and we're going to do it right the first time. I wasn't totally naive. I knew that that may not be our journey, but I think I just thought, well, if I put my best foot forward, then hopefully I'm doing all that I can for it to be a better journey. We didn't try before the wedding because I never mentioned, but we had such stress with our wedding. Our venue was hacked, we lost money, it was quite the palaver. So because that was stressful, we decided to wait until after the wedding. And I read the book, It Starts With an Egg. Generally, lifestyle wise, I don't drink caffeine and never have. I very rarely drink alcohol, a few times a year I'd say. I'm quite fit and healthy and I eat a really good diet anyway. So lifestyle, I didn't feel like much needed to be changed. Ollie did cut out a lot of caffeine. The thing really that I implemented from that book was all of the vitamins. Oh, the vitamins really is a minefield when you're trying to conceive, but that book had so many good reviews, we decided to try with those first. And I guess the other thing to mention there is that my periods have always been very regular, and I had been off birth control for about 6 years, so a very long time. But because we knew that we were going to start trying to conceive, I actually had a bit of a change in my periods. 2 years prior, they got a lot heavier. I started having a lot more blood clots, which I'd never had before. I did wonder whether that was something to do with exercise because I was doing less exercise, or maybe stress or the house renovations. So I cut back a lot on stress. I tried to exercise more. Nothing changed. My doctor did actually send me for an ultrasound, so I went to my local hospital. They did an internal scan, and I didn't know at the time, but I was very early on in that first pregnancy. So they checked my uterus, absolutely fine, and my ovaries. Now my left ovary did actually have, I think it's called a dermoid cyst, hope that I've got that right, which you basically have from birth. Mine was like millimeters, absolutely teeny tiny. In fact, she said she could barely see it, but they do monitor it on the NHS. So she said you'll have a follow-up appointment in 6 months' time. However, a few weeks on from that, I found out that I was pregnant, so I thought, well, I'll be getting ultrasounds anyway. We were thrilled, obviously. So excited to be pregnant, and I knew straight away I was having this bit of insomnia and weird dreams at night, so Ollie and I took the test together. At about 3.5 weeks with the early detection, so now you can detect 6 days prior to your period, and the the positive. I can't tell you that feeling when it comes up pregnant. It was just like this outer body absolute bliss. And of course, straight away we started planning. When's the due date? When are we going to tell family? When are we going to announce online? When should we do the nursery? What room is the nursery going to be in? Shall we do an early scan? Shall we do the harmony test? Check everything's okay at 10 weeks? And for the latter few there, we decided yes. We wanted to do the harmony test at 10 weeks, which checks if anything is wrong chromosomally, and it can also tell you the gender, which we weren't too bothered about. And because of that, we thought, well, let's just do an early scan too. Basically, mostly excitement, to be honest. I feel like I downloaded 3 pregnancy apps and checking every morning what was going on, how the baby was developing each week. And at the 7-week mark, we had our early scan, which was private, so we paid, I feel like it was like maybe £80 to go to a local clinic and have the ultrasound. Now, when I first walked in there, I actually felt quite nervous because she was saying, well, why have you come today? And we just thought, well, we just want to see if anything's growing inside, because there is this nervousness in the first few weeks. I could feel my body changing, but it still feels strange not to be able to see anything or really know that everything is okay. Anyway, we had the internal scan. And it was initially quite positive, yep, there's baby, all looks good, there's the yolk sac, formation's really good, it's in the right place. And then she was sticking around for a bit, having a little look. And I'll never forget, she goes, there's the heartbeat, and could see the little heart flickering away. And I turned to Ollie and I said something like, oh, and smiled. And I think that's the point that she was like, oh, maybe I should say something. Because she did follow up by saying, I wasn't going to say anything because this could be nothing, but she said the heartbeat was a little bit slower than she would have hoped for the 7 weeks. So we came crashing down a bit, but because she'd also followed it by, I wasn't going to say anything, we thought, well, maybe this is nothing to worry about. Dates of actual conception are so tricky. So maybe it happened a little bit later than we expected. Babies grow at different rates. Often this happens and they catch up and then they're bigger and the heartbeat's stronger than usual. So anything can change overnight. However, she did say she worked on the early pregnancy unit at a local hospital and she was happy to book me in 2 weeks' time for a scan just to make sure that everything was catching up and looked better. Of course, we didn't say no to that, so we went away feeling a little bit mixed, but equally reassured that we were going to have it checked in 2 weeks' time. She also gave me the direct number for the early pregnancy unit, so if anything happened in the meantime, if I had any questions. She was absolutely lovely, and I feel like that whole early scan was a real blessing in disguise. Then all we did when we got home was Google. I was on Mumsnet, and of course it got us nowhere because there were positive stories, there were more negative stories, and all we could do was wait. And I remember in that time just praying and saying, I just want to know either way, because what I had read so many stories of poor women who just don't get an answer. They go back for that scan and there's still a weak heartbeat, and so it's another 2 weeks, and it's just this scary weight of holding on and hoping. And I wanted to know, so I was just saying, like, I hope in those 2 weeks I know whether it's positive or negative. I just want to know. But only about 5 days later, I had the first signs of the miscarriage. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here because the one thing that I wanted at that time was information. I had nobody who had gone through it. I didn't know who to speak to. As much as you can ring the early pregnancy unit, they're there to give you medical advice. They're not really there like a friendly chat like this is. So I had discharge. I had like more of a brownish blood, I would say, and straight away I knew, my heart sank, and that's when I was like, okay, this isn't good news. This was on a Thursday. I called Ollie, he came home, and we just didn't know at the time whether anything was going to happen. So my mum knew, my parents knew about the pregnancy the whole way through. So my mum came down on the Friday and she stayed with me, and I called that morning, I called the early pregnancy unit, and they went through what might happen if it was to be a miscarriage. Now, unfortunately, I was going into a weekend, which just wasn't the best timing. And I did feel quite alone at this point. You're just left to let it happen. So she said if I get any extreme pain that I need to go to the emergency walk-in. Any extreme loss of blood. I remember thinking at this time, like, well, what is extreme pain? And what is extreme loss of blood? How much pain will I be in? So much fear for the unknown. How was this going to happen? When was it going to happen? I had this real worry that it was going to happen at night, because I felt like at night you're more vulnerable. It's dark. It feels like getting help is a lot harder. Places aren't open, people are sleeping. You're more in some kind of like sleep-like state. So I just didn't want to go to sleep. I was so scared of what was to come. And I actually read an article, if I can find it, I will link it below. It was 3 ladies who had been through a miscarriage, and it gave me such strength. And I can't remember if they all talked, or one of them talked about really making the time and the environment, like consciously thinking about putting on relaxing music, feeling like you're looking after your body. One of them even said, which I'm not really spiritual, but being strong, letting that little one pass, because it is quite a traumatic experience, especially when this is supposed to be the most exciting thing that has happened. And growing a baby inside you feels so precious, and then having to let that go in a way that you don't know how it's going to happen is painful. It's a really difficult experience. So back to my timeline. On the Friday, my mum was here, and what an awful day. I relaxed, we did a puzzle. I actually said to my mum, because it was November now and coming up to Christmas, and I was like, I just want to bake gingerbread. Though I didn't, I just wanted to watch her bake gingerbread, smell the smell in the kitchen, and have like a wholesome day. And while I was stood in the kitchen, I just had this feeling, so I have it every time that I have my period. It's like a heavy feeling in my uterus, a bit of a pulling, and I just turned to my mum and I said, it's definitely going to happen. I'm going to miscarry. I can feel it. And probably about an hour later is when I had my first real red blood. At this point, it didn't feel anything more or less than my normal average period, though I would say that my normal period is on the heavier side. I wept that day like I've never wept before, and it still makes me feel a bit sad thinking about it now. Even though I feel like I've healed from it in my day-to-day life, I don't think you ever really get over specifically that day. Utterly, like, overwhelmingly sad. Of course, then Ollie came home and we processed it a bit together. It was such a binding experience, actually. That's one thing I have to say. My battery had run out just at that point, but Ollie was such a support and we really tried to get through it together. Obviously he was going through it too, and there's a shared sadness there, but equally I think for the female, the one going through it, it's physically difficult too. And it's from looking back now, I can see that it's impossible to mentally heal until you have physically healed first, and that was still going to take a bit of time. So then Saturday we woke up. What a strange day. I'll never forget that day. And everybody reacts and does things in really different ways. I did not want to leave the house, but I did want Ollie to not have to just sit around. He's such a sweetheart, but I knew that he'd be there saying, are you okay, are you okay? And I knew that I could cope with periods of him leaving the house and coming back. So he like went out and got some food. Little bit of a funny story. I don't wear pads ever for my period, so I didn't have any in the house. And one thing with miscarriage is that you cannot use tampons or cups or anything like that. So I said to him, please, can you pick me up a few? Of course he said absolutely fine. And I was saying like the heavier ones, probably like night, they might look a little bit dark. And cutting that story short, he came back with incontinence pads, and we just, at such a sad time, we just laughed and my dignity literally went out of the window. But they worked, an absolute treat. So would recommend. That day was hard and I could really feel, I knew exactly when it was going to happen, which I didn't know I would experience. So with my period, I don't get a huge amount of cramps, but these cramps were so different than anything I had experienced. They really ramped up mid-morning. I could feel cramps really almost like pulsating in my uterus. And I just said to Ollie, he'd just come back, I said, like, I think it's going to happen. Now going back, sorry, I didn't want to jump back and forth too much. The early pregnancy unit also said on the phone probably the most difficult thing. You can try and keep the little one, the fetus, for testing, and that's all they said at the time. And both Ollie and I were in the same boat about this. If we could, we would. This might be too much information, and I kind of do urge you, if you're not going through this, then you might want to skip past this. But the EPAC centre did say that if it wasn't the weekend, then they would have given, I would have gone in and they could have given a bit of, I guess you'd call it like a care package. So it has like a little mesh thing that you can put over the toilet and a container. She said on the phone to me, you know, if you do want to try and keep it for testing, then you can do something like that at home. Ollie did do the majority of this for me. He duct taped a sieve that we had to the toilet. And honestly, the whole experience was way calmer than I was expecting. We sterilised a container, like I'll never forget, we were just there in the kitchen being like, well, should we sterilise it? Should we boil the kettle? Which we did do. And we managed to take it to the hospital on the Monday. Sorry, I didn't know how much of that to say or not to say, but I feel like if you are going through it, then it's the kind of thing that you want to hear. I doubted so much through that time what kind of person I was. And Ollie and I are both very similar. We're both very practical people. And I will do pretty much anything for my health. If it has to be an internal scan, I don't mind. I actually had an internal scan a few days after the miscarriage while I was still bleeding, but I was like, well, my health is more important. I need to get the answers. However, I will say on the phone, she said for testing, I didn't realise that the testing that you get, and the main reason why I really wanted to talk about this, on the NHS in the UK, the testing that you get is for molar pregnancy. They don't test for anything else. On reflection, obviously first time, so difficult when you're just going through it. I wish that I had maybe found somewhere privately to get the testing. I don't know if that would have been useful or not, but at least if we had known if it was a chromosomal issue or if the fetus was okay, then we might have been in a different position now moving forward. And if you're worried about knowing if it was a miscarriage or if you have or haven't passed it, we'll say at the 8-week mark, I could see the formation of the sac and the yolk sac. It was in with a lot of blood clotting too, but it was clear for me to see. Whew, I feel like if I have kept all of that in, that might have been a bit heavy. The following weeks after that were difficult, and I went into research mode, so did Ollie. Why might this have happened? Who we can talk to, who we can see? We chose to talk to somebody privately, so I found a consultant because I had read so much about progesterone being really positive, and if we were to get pregnant again, that is something that I wanted to try, of which we did do. We did have the chance of progesterone when I was hopefully next pregnant. And from all of that research and from Mumsnet, which I have differing opinions on, but to a certain extent after the miscarriage, I think that was a really dangerous place for me because there were so many articles saying, you're really fertile after miscarriage. You could get pregnant 2 weeks after. No doubt you will get pregnant a few weeks after. Now, because we got pregnant quite quickly the first time, I thought, that's it. I'm going to be pregnant in 2 weeks for sure. I'm going to be on the same timeline. I'm sure this is a one-off. I'm sure it'll be a healthy pregnancy and I'll be having a baby a few months after I thought I would. And that's what I held on to for such a long time. And I came crushing down. I think I coped with the miscarriage so well because there was such a glimmer of hope that it's been devastating, it's been hard, it's been traumatic, but we will still be on that journey. And that's one thing that's the hardest about miscarriages. If you're very much a person based on timelines, which I am, every timeline that I hit after that was so difficult. So we were supposed to be announcing at Christmas, crushing, still wasn't pregnant. We had our 9-year anniversary in January. I thought definitely be pregnant by then. I wasn't. My birthday, which has just been in March, no doubt, absolutely will be pregnant by then. I wasn't. During this time I had really changed. I desperately wanted to find something to get me pregnant that month. I was trying everything. Grapefruit juice, different vitamins. I was taking the ovulation strips anyway. We tried pre-seed. What else did we try? Everything. And it was only like a month and a half after the miscarriage. I didn't ovulate. I'm pretty sure the 2 weeks after the miscarriage, I didn't ovulate. So this is one thing that I really wanted to research. Well, what is going to happen to my body now after the miscarriage. So I miscarried at 8 weeks, and that was mid-November. 31 days later, I got my period back, and I've actually had very consistent periods since. However, I think that might have been a lot to do with acupuncture. So that's the one thing that I added in and I felt like was really beneficial after the miscarriage. My hormones were off whack. I couldn't believe for such, like, it is an early miscarriage, 8 weeks, but your body changes so much in that time. I literally had to change bras because my boobs had grown and were throbbing so much. It wasn't just the sadness of the miscarriage, but my hormones, which were really affecting me. So I actually really tried to track it, and when I was feeling low with my hormones, and my acupuncturist was able to heal that for me, I guess you would say. So I'd say I miscarried in November, December, January, February. Probably by the February is when I felt like my body was back to normal, and that may have been helped by getting a puppy. Now, I'm not saying a puppy is going to heal all of your issues, but Otto healed my heart, and we were considering a puppy anyway. We were planning to get a puppy, and then we got pregnant quite quickly. So when we did have the miscarriage, it just seemed like a really good time to think about then introducing a puppy into our lives. So I'm so glad that we did, because he brings so much joy and so much happiness. And then I guess there's the where are we now? Sadly, we have had another loss. Very early this time, I had a chemical pregnancy last month. Having recently had a miscarriage, it didn't affect me anywhere near like the miscarriage did, because I think my heart was guarded when I took the pregnancy test anyway. As I mentioned, my periods were on the dot, always on the dot, and had been up until that month. I was late, I had a positive pregnancy test. And then unfortunately, a few days later when I actually tested on my own this time. And I wasn't even going to tell anybody, because I thought if this was our time, then I really want everybody to be able to feel the joy. On reflection, I would have never been able to keep it from Ollie that long. And I tested with him a few days later, and the line was weaker, so my heart just sank. And then I got my period, which would have been probably about 4 weeks, 6 days, so nearly a week late on my period. It could just be unlucky again. We could have just been unlucky. But now we're feeling like we're going to do some tests, which was another reason why I wanted to make this video, because I really feel strongly like I should be documenting this journey for us and for any other women going through it out there. So potentially a recurrent miscarriage. It doesn't seem like conceiving. We seem to conceive quite quickly, but it's actually holding on to the pregnancy. Now, this is like opening a can of worms, because there can be so many different factors. Obviously, the easiest is DNA, and testing the male DNA is easier. Testing female DNA is far harder, but there are lots that I can test. I didn't mention that actually after my first initial miscarriage at 8 weeks, I did have some blood tests through my doctor. After pushing quite a bit, I had blood clotting, just a general health hormone checkup, and all came back a-okay. So we can already tick a few things off that list, but the rest is quite intensive and quite long. And then I also had my 6 months. So remember at the beginning I said I had a scan, and the NHS did a checkup 6 months later. I had my 6-month checkup recently, and all normal, healthy. The dermoid cyst was still there, but it was teeny tiny, same size, it's not growing, so no problem. She said she could barely see it. She actually said if she hadn't have known that somebody else had found it, she wouldn't have been able to see it. So I feel quite encouraged that I've been able to get a few tests on the NHS, because I know that is really hard, and if you can really push for it, I would push to get something on the NHS. I don't know why they just don't even do like a really general iron test for women who have had a miscarriage. That bugs me. But Tommy's is also a really great resource as well. I often refer back to a lot of their articles. Any advice I'd love. Any clinics in the UK, doctors that you would really recommend. To a certain extent, we are desperately trying just to enjoy life and work on, I think work on is the right word, the journey not taking over our lives, because it can be all consuming. But the one thing that I learned, I feel like, from the miscarriage is that every day is precious with the loved ones that you have with you here and now. Especially with this one, who is snoozy at the moment. Yeah, it's such a tough life for you, isn't it? I know, you've been listening to me natter on for all of this time. If you are going through it, I really feel for you. It's such a difficult situation, and know that I'm sitting here now feeling okay because I'm having a good day, but I still have bad days 6 months on. And in the real midst of the hardest part of it, I had a lot of bad days, a lot of bad days, a lot of days where I just didn't even want to get out of bed. But give yourself that time, give yourself the time to heal, specifically physically, because then I think the mental aspect will follow on from that. I guess this will be part 1, 2 of this journey that we're on. Next one will hopefully be doing some testing and potentially getting some answers. On the way to getting another little one in our house, because I just know that it will happen. It'll happen at some point, won't it? It's like, leave me alone, I'm sleeping. I will see you guys soon. I hope you're all well. Bye. Bye. Yeah, look, your face is going to cheer them up a lot more than mine. Yeah, they've been staring at mine for probably about half an hour, maybe an hour. This is Otto, by the way, if you're new. He's 14 weeks and you're a cavapoo. Freaking adorable. Bye, guys.